The cafeteria at Anderson Air Base buzzed with noise, trays clattering, laughter echoing off steel walls. Then she walked in. Maya Rowe, mid-20s. Civilian badge on her chest, a faint scar tracing her jaw like a lightning mark. The laughter softened, then shifted. "That's the one who fried the jet's navigation system last month," someone whispered. Another voice cut through, cocky, loud, "Careful, boys, she might drop a wrench and take out the whole wing again." Snickers followed. Chairs squeaked. Maya didn't answer, didn't even flinch. She simply moved to the far corner, sat down, and placed her tray with surgical precision, the kind of calm only a soldier ever learns. For a heartbeat, the air changed. Her eyes lifted toward the flag outside the window, steady, unreadable, unbroken. And somewhere behind the laughter, a quiet voice said what others thought: "She doesn't belong here." They didn't know how wrong they were. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The next morning, the hum of turbines carried across Anderson Air Base like a heartbeat. Beyond the runway shimmered the Pacific, blue, endless, and harsh in the sun. Inside Hangar 12, Maya Rowe moved between open panels of an F-15's belly like a ghost no one wanted to see. Her hands were steady, methodical. The same could not be said for the voices echoing nearby. "She's the contractor who botched the calibration last month, right?" one young airman whispered. "Yeah? Don't know why they still keep her around." "Probably some diversity thing." Laughter. Then silence when she turned slightly, not with anger, but with a kind of stillness that unnerved them. Maya didn't respond. She just reached for a torque wrench, adjusted a coupling, and double-checked the diagnostic line. Every move deliberate, every breath measured. To most on base, she was a quiet civilian with a scar and a limp, nothing more. But there were things they didn't know. Once, she'd worn the same uniform they did. Once, she'd carried the rank of staff sergeant. She had served 8 years in the Air Force, deployed 3 times. Her last mission, classified, ended in Afghanistan, deep in the mountains near coast. A helicopter crash. Fire, metal twisted into the earth. She'd pulled 2 men out before the explosion. The third didn't make it. And when the medevac finally came, it was Maya who went out on a stretcher, not for wounds alone, but for the weight she refused to speak about. Now, years later, the Air Force knew her as a civilian technician with exceptional avionics experience. No one asked where she'd earned it. No one dared. She arrived before sunrise every day, checked her toolkit twice, logged every part replaced, every calibration, every test. She ate lunch alone, at the same corner table where no one sat. During breaks, she'd sketch wiring diagrams on old paper towels, tracing every system like she was rebuilding something invisible. There were tiny tells that no one caught. The way she still folded napkins into clean triangles, the same folds used for field maps. The way she stood when the flag was raised each morning, hands at her sides, heels together, eyes steady. Or how she still kept her left wrist bare, though the faint tan line showed a missing watch, a soldier's watch. But people see what they want to see. In the crew room, the younger techs joked about her quietness. "She acts like she's on some secret mission," one said, rolling his eyes. Another added, "Nah, she's just one of those types who think they're smarter than the rest of us." They laughed again, louder this time, because laughter is easier than respect, and she heard it all. Every word. But she never looked up. She had learned long ago that silence carries its own kind of strength. Captain Blake Monroe had no patience for quiet people. A decorated instructor pilot in his mid-30s, Monroe was the kind of officer who believed volume equaled authority. He'd earned a reputation for pushing young airmen hard, and civilians even harder. That morning, Monroe spotted Maya inspecting a damaged flight computer and called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, Rowe, try not to blow this one up too, all right?" The nearby techs chuckled. Maya didn't flinch. "Yes, sir," she said softly, not looking away from her work. Monroe frowned, irritation flickering behind his aviator glasses. He'd expected defensiveness, maybe an apology. Instead, he got discipline. Quiet, efficient, unnerving. Something about her bothered him, though he couldn't explain why. To him, she didn't fit the civilian mold. Too precise, too formal, too military. Still, he dismissed the thought and turned to his team. Let's move. I want those birds in the air by 1400. On the far end of the hangar, behind a tinted office window, Wing Commander Aaron Doyle observed the exchange. He was in his 50s, calm, even-tempered, and famously hard to impress. To most on base, Doyle was more legend than man, a combat veteran who spoke rarely but carried an aura of command that needed no volume. He watched Maya for a long moment, her posture, her focus, the subtle wince when she bent too far on her left leg. Then, quietly, he said to his adjutant, "That one's not new to this." The younger officer shrugged. "She's a contractor, sir. Civilian tech." Doyle's eyes didn't leave her. "Maybe, but she works like someone who's seen things they don't teach in manuals." Days turned into weeks. The pattern repeated. Maya arrived first, left last, fixed what others missed. And each day, the whispers followed, quiet at first, then bolder. She doesn't talk because she's hiding something. She walks funny, maybe faked her credentials. She thinks she's better than everyone else. The words slid off her like rain off steel. She'd been called worse, in languages half the base had never heard. But alone at her bench, when the hangar lights dimmed and the noise faded, there were moments her composure cracked. She'd trace the scar along her jaw with her thumb, a habit she didn't even notice anymore, and stare at her reflection in the polished metal. For a split second, she'd see the fire again, the night sky over coast burning orange, the sound of a man screaming for help. Then she'd breathe once, steady and slow, and return to work. Outside, the Pacific wind whipped across the tarmac. The flag snapped sharply in the air. At exactly 0700, Maya paused mid-step, turned toward it, and saluted, not out of protocol, but instinct. A nearby airman snickered. "She's not even in uniform," another muttered. "Must think she's still active duty." Maya didn't correct them. Some habits weren't meant to be unlearned. In the mess hall later that week, she sat alone again. The chatter around her blurred into background noise. Her tray was half untouched. She spent most of her lunch drawing an aircraft silhouette on a napkin, marking each system in silence. When Monroe entered, laughter followed him like a shadow. He passed her table and smirked. "Still sketching? You planning to actually build one this time?" A few around him chuckled. She looked up briefly, eyes calm, steady, unreadable. "No, sir," she replied, "just remembering." He froze for a second, caught off guard by the weight behind her tone. Not defiance, not sarcasm. Just truth. But instead of asking, he scoffed and moved on. That night, long after everyone had gone, the hangar was dark except for a single work light. Maya stayed behind, tightening the last bolts on a radar array. The echo of metal on metal filled the silence. When she finished, she wiped her hands, placed the wrench perfectly parallel to the mat, and stared at the aircraft's insignia. It wasn't the same model that had gone down years ago, but close enough to stir the ghosts. Under her breath, she whispered, "You'd have liked this one, Lopez." Her voice was soft, almost prayer-like, lost in the sound of distant waves beyond the runway. Then she turned off the light and walked out, her limp more pronounced in the dark, but her back still straight, her eyes still forward. Some people wear their past like a uniform. Others carry it in silence. In the way they move, the way they breathe, the way they stand when no one's watching. Maya Rowe wasn't hiding. She was remembering. By midweek, the mockery had rhythm. It started small, like gravel skittering down a hillside before a slide. A comment in the tool cage. A smirk on the flight line. A laugh that lingered a heartbeat too long after Maya passed. Each piece rolled into the next until the noise became normal. During an equipment check, a voice surfaced from behind a rack of spares. "Hope she doesn't fry another system," someone muttered, pretending to study a checklist. Maya didn't look up. She tightened a Canon plug on a mission computer, gave it a careful quarter turn, and ran a continuity check with her multimeter. The numbers were steady. Her breathing was steady. The room was not. At the canteen later, silverware clinked, trays slid, and caffeine lines formed like aircraft holding patterns. A junior crew chief called out across 3 tables without bothering to lower his tone. "Hey, Ro, tell us which screwdriver took you down." Snickers broke. A few sets of eyes flicked toward her face, toward the fine line that traced her jaw, then away again, as if the scar might look back. Maya set her coffee down without a sound. She folded her napkin into a triangle, then into a smaller one, then slid it under the cup to keep it from rocking on a warped tabletop. She took a sip. She didn't answer. The silence that followed wasn't respect. It was dismissal, the kind that says, "You're not worth another joke." On the flight line, a gust of Pacific wind drove the smell of salt through heat and jet fuel. Crew chiefs guided a jet onto chocks. Tires hissed. Inside Hangar 12, Captain Blake Monroe used the settled crowd like a stage. "Row," he called, voice carrying off aluminum and bone. "You logged those discrepancies on the Dash 27 yet?" "Yes, sir," she said, eyes still on the open access panel. He waited for her to turn. She didn't. His smile tightened. "If you'd ever been in combat," he said, just loud enough to gather witnesses, "you'd know these systems aren't toys." Someone exhaled a laugh through his nose. Someone else glanced at the floor. Airman First Class Lewis looked at the captain, then back at Maya, as if measuring something he couldn't name. "Yes, sir," Maya replied. "No heat. No edge. Just a flat calm that made the space around it colder." Her obedience was mistaken for weakness. That was the part people liked best, the righteousness of scolding someone who didn't fight back. It let them be brave without cost. The next day, it intensified. On a pre-flight, a pilot in a crisp flight suit ambled by, sunglasses reflecting everyone but himself. He tapped the nose of the jet with 2 knuckles like it was a lucky charm. "Careful with our bird contractor," he said. "She's a little more complicated than a toaster." Maya checked the built-in test status for the EGI, the embedded GPS INS that gives a fighter its sense of place and purpose. She annotated AFTO 781A with neat block letters, then resecured the panel. The pilot waited for the sting of a retort. None came. He left, bored. By afternoon, the crew room had developed a script. When she entered, voices smoothed down to a quiet that wasn't kind. Conversations paused, heads bent together. A cough covered a laugh. She signed out a T-handle and a torque wrench, logged the time with precise digits, and stepped back into the heat. "What is she doing?" one airman murmured. "Trying to look busy," another said. "Civilians, man." Lewis wiped grease on a rag, eyes following Maya's hands. He'd noticed things the others didn't. How she traced each panel line with a fingertip before opening it. The way a pilot runs a hand along a wing before trust. How she cradled a line-replaceable unit like it was a life, not a box. How she listened to the aircraft, head tilted, breath held, as if the jet might answer. He wasn't sure what he was looking at yet. But it wasn't pretend. That evening, during a rain squall that hammered the roof like 1,000 unfiled reports, Monroe found her at a bench with a disassembled comms module laid out in clean rows. The components were aligned like formation aircraft. "What do you see?" he asked, suddenly beside her. Maya didn't jump. She gestured to a hairline crack in a solder joint you had to want to see. "Thermal cycling. Microfracture on the foil trace. Intermittent drop when the temp spikes." Monroe leaned in, eyes narrowing despite himself. It was there. Barely. He straightened before admiration could catch him. "Did fix it." "And Ro?" He waited until she met his gaze. "Try not to turn the next one into a campfire." She nodded once. "Yes, sir." His smile returned for the room, not for her. "See, gentlemen," he said to the nearest cluster. "Even civilians can follow instructions." The men chuckled. Lewis didn't. The wheat pressed forward. A rivet gun somewhere stuttered. A forklift beeped in tired reverse. A gust slipped under a hangar door and scattered paper across the deck. Maya stopped what she was doing to catch a skittering maintenance record with the edge of her boot, then knelt, careful on the left leg, to gather the pages. She stacked them in order by the handwritten numbers at the top right corner, squared the edges with her palms, and set them on a table with the care of placing a folded flag. "Show off," someone said under his breath. "Or just thorough," Lewis said, almost to himself. The next morning, a scope card alarm sang shrill and insistent. A navigation system failed its alignment test twice in a row, then once more for good measure, a triple insult. The jet was scheduled for a sortie. The window was thin. People moved faster, said less, watched more. Monroe seized the opportunity. "Row," he barked, pointing to the stubborn bird. "Recalibrate the EGI." Timer runs. Team watches. Heads turned. Conversations died. The hangar seemed to lean in. "Yes, sir," she said, no hesitation. No sigh. She slid her hair behind one ear and stepped up the stand. Monroe clapped his hands once, sharp. 15 minutes. In front of the crew. "Let's see what YouTube University taught you." A ripple of laughter. Someone took out a phone to watch the clock. Someone else whispered odds. Lewis positioned himself near the nose. He wasn't sure why he felt like he needed to witness this, only that he did. Maya set the cart where she wanted it, not where it had been left. She checked its ground. She verified power. She tethered the interface with a practiced twist of the connector collar. No cross-thread, no wobble. She ran the self-test. She waited, eyes on the numbers, but also on the silence of the machine. A minute passed. Her hands moved with economy. No wasted reach, no redundant motion. She commanded a cold start alignment, purged the stale data, and input the aircraft's present position with small, precise keystrokes. She didn't talk. She didn't fill the air with nerves. She breathed. Monroe, beside his spectators, smirked for them. "Guess even civilians can follow instructions," he said, rehearsing the line for the end. Maya reseated a suspect LRU not because the book told her to at that step, but because the feel of the latch had a half millimeter of give. Lewis saw that, saw the way she paused, pressed it home until it clicked like a clean trigger break, and only then moved on. That was muscle memory. That was not a beginner's hand. 10 minutes, someone called, showing the countdown. Maya initiated the next sequence. The alignment crept forward, numbers crossing thresholds one after another. She watched like a medic over vitals. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at Monroe. She might as well have been alone at 3 in the morning with a dying bird and an empty sky to save. 8 minutes, another voice announced, enjoying the pressure. Monroe folded his arms. "Any day now, Ro." She ignored him. She pressed 2 keys together to access a secondary diag screen most people forgot existed, the one that exposed gyro-bias drift when the machine pretended to be healthy. She made a tiny, almost invisible correction. The number stabilized. Lewis's eyebrows rose. He knew maybe 3 techs on base who ever used that screen. He'd learned it from a crusty master sergeant who kept a bent coin in his pocket and talked to jets when he thought no one was listening. Where had she learned it? 6 minutes, the clock holder sang, turning the count into a taunt. A red line blinked once and died. Green followed, steady and uninteresting, the way green should be. Maya closed the panel. She wrote a clean entry, action taken, data purged, alignment complete, fault isolated to a marginal connector. No flourish, no apology. 5 minutes, the voice said, almost disappointed. "Done," Maya said, stepping down from the stand. Monroe blinked. He'd had a small speech ready, honed to be half congratulation and half cut. He opened his mouth and heard himself say the only line that fit. "Guess even civilians can follow instructions." It hung there like a cheap flag in a stiff wind. A few laughs came on cue. They sounded wrong in the big space. Maya nodded once. "Jet's good for the sortie, sir." She held his eyes for the first time, not defiant, not meek. Just there, present. Then she turned back to the tool cart, coiled the cable without a kink, and stowed it. Louis watched her go. He pressed his own tongue against the back of his teeth, where he kept his words when it wasn't his turn to speak. That should have been the end of it, but successes that contradict a popular story don't end rumors, they harden them. By afternoon, the narrative had adjusted itself like a badly tuned radio seeking a station. She probably got lucky, someone said. Monroe basically fixed it before she touched it, another added. Timer was generous. They needed the myth of her incompetence more than they needed the truth of her skill. Myths are comfortable. Skills ask things from you. On Friday, the tempo increased. A training cycle compressed the day. Jets came and went. Checklists multiplied and got shorter. The hangar felt like a lung. Inhale as aircraft arrived, exhale when they rolled out to the sun. In the middle of it, a new attempt at humiliation arrived, neat as a memo. Monroe tossed a mission data cartridge onto a bench near her elbow. It clattered, skidded to a stop against her notebook. "Rebuild and reload," he said loudly. "We're wheels up at 14:30. And try not to erase the fleet." A small laugh. A camera phone lifted just enough to catch her hands, not her face. "Yes, sir," Maya said. She didn't explain that she'd been rebuilding cartridges in blackout tents with a flashlight under a poncho because the glow drew attention. She didn't tell them she'd once done 3 in a row with a busted thumb because a pilot needed a working jet more than she needed a break. She just worked. She opened the image, verified the hash like someone verifying the name on a dog tag, restored the file corruptions the last handler hadn't noticed, and loaded it. She checked. She double-checked. She logged. She made the world less likely to catch fire. "Row," Monroe called, now from the ladder of a waiting fighter. "You sure you didn't put self-destruct in there?" Louis, standing at the intake with a flashlight, heard it and saw the small tightening at the corner of Maya's jaw. Not a flinch. A calculation. He'd seen that look on people ready to carry weight for others. She handed the cartridge up without ceremony. "Good hunting, sir." Monroe took it. For a second, their fingers almost touched, and didn't. He turned away to his audience before anything human could pass between them. In the late afternoon, heat shimmered at knee-height. Concrete radiated its resentment back into the air. A marine layer gathered fat and gray along the horizon like a curtain waiting for cue. The base felt something building and didn't have a name for it. A forklift driver clipped a pallet at the hangar mouth, and boxes exploded into straps and foam. Someone swore. Someone else laughed. Maya was closest. She stepped in, knee-braced, and steadied the wobbling stack with both arms while the forks reversed. For a breath, her left leg trembled from old damage. She set the load down, straightened, and took a slow breath that no one heard. "Show off," the driver said, embarrassed. "Thanks," Louis said to Maya, quietly enough that it was just for her and the jet. She nodded, equally quiet. "Watch your swing radius," she murmured. It wasn't a scold. It was care disguised as instruction. That night, the rain returned with a steady hiss. In the echo of it, a story flickered in the break room like a cheap news clip on a bad television. "I heard she failed out of tech school twice," someone offered, leaning back in a chair. "Brother's a colonel," another said. "That's how she got hired." "A colonel wouldn't claim that," a third laughed. Louis listened, rag in hand, staring at the grease pattern it made on the table. "Or maybe she's just good," he said. They looked at him as if he'd switched languages mid-sentence. He shrugged and stood, done being the extra in someone else's comedy. The rain beat time against the roof. Saturday drills compressed everyone's patience to the size of a dime. A training sim hiccuped and became a real-world caution when a hydraulic pressure transient sent a warning across a pilot's HUD like a bad omen. Alarms tried to be helpful in the way alarms always are: too loud, too late, too many. "Row, on me," Monroe snapped, already moving. She was already moving too. They reached the jet together, him from habit, her from a gravity inside her that pulled her toward trouble, the way the moon pulls the tide. Crew chiefs hot-stepped chocks, ground power hummed, a canopy cracked open like a mouth gasping for air. "Shut down sequence," Monroe barked, pointing. Maya didn't point. She reached. She killed power to a bus in the order you do if you've seen what happens when you don't, then bled residual energy like a field medic pinching off an artery. The warning light died reluctantly. "Don't touch that," a pilot shouted from the ladder, reflex trumping sense. "Too late," Maya said, voice calm, already 3 actions ahead. Monroe saw it. So did everyone else. The moment was 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it carried the weight of a recollection he couldn't quite drag into the light, a memory of someone in a different place moving with the same silent certainty while the world burned around them. "All right," he said, softening without deciding to. "All right." The jet stabilized. The drill resumed. People patted themselves for a crisis avoided. They left out the part where she had walked into it first, so they didn't have to. When it was over, when the systems were quiet again, when the echo of stress had time to go looking for someone to blame, the jokes returned. "Good thing the contractor didn't set the fire this time," a voice said near the coffee urn. Maya poured 2 cups, added nothing, and set one on the counter beside the remark without a word. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a fact. People needed caffeine more than they needed cleverness. She took her cup and left. Lewis watched her go, the second cup cooling in the steam of nothing said. He found her later beside a diagnostic cart, flipping through a technical order with her thumb and not her eyes, the way you do when you're confirming what you already know. He hovered, awkward, then spoke. "Ma'am, Ms. Rowe, Maya," he winced. "Sorry?" She looked up. The smile that didn't quite reach her eyes saved him from drowning in his own greeting. "Lewis," she said, using his name like it had always been hers to use. "You need something?" He shook his head. "Just wanted to say you handled that EGI like?" He stopped, not sure how to finish without sounding like the others he didn't want to be. "Like you'd done it before," he finished, simple and true. A muscle in her cheek moved, not a flinch. "A decision. Once or twice," she said. He nodded, swallowed. More than that, she didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence between them wasn't dismissive. It was shelter. Across the hangar, Monroe's voice fired again, pulling both their attention. "All right, people. Since we're all such experts, let's make it official." He slapped the side of a different jet with a flat palm. "Navigation system. Out here. Now." A small crowd formed with the eagerness humans reserve for either celebrations or accidents. Monroe held up the maintenance timer, a digital metronome of expectations. He gave the moment the shape of theater. "Row," he said. "Under supervision. Under a clock." "Yes, sir," she answered. "What would you have done?" The narrator's voice might ask the viewer if this were already a story, walk away, or let them break your silence. Maya didn't walk, she climbed the stand. The timer chirped. Fingers of heat curled through the hangar again as the crowd settled into the shade of somebody else's risk. She sequenced the power down in the order the TO demanded and experience insisted. She pulled, checked, reseated. She commanded a realignment not with hope but with expectation. She caught a drift again before the machine admitted it. Her hands were quiet. Her breath was quiet. Her mind was not quiet at all. It was a grid with lights she turned on one by one. Lewis saw everything the way you only see when the noise stops mattering. He saw the way she tapped the panel twice with the back of a knuckle, a habit some old crew chiefs passed down like a blessing. He saw her glance at the angle of the ladder, unconsciously placing it so a pilot could bail out without hitting it if things turned bad. He saw the way her shoes were positioned for a fast step sideways, not back. People who've been in rooms that go wrong don't stand straight on. They stand ready to be where the danger isn't yet. 13 minutes, someone crowed. Monroe smirked with the ease of a man who believes more in the punchline than the truth it's supposed to cover. "We doing okay up there?" "We're fine, sir," she said, neither hurried nor slow. 10 minutes. A hum softened. A fault flag died. The cart screen steadied into the kind of boredom you pray for in aircraft. Maya exhaled only enough to acknowledge it. She secured the panel, signed the forms, handed the timer back with 2 minutes to spare, and stepped down. Polite claps? No, just air. the sound of men suspecting they might have enjoyed the wrong parts of the show. "Guess even civilians can follow instructions," Monroe said, sticking the landing of a line he didn't realize had grown old. A few chuckled because they needed a cue. Maya looked past him to the jet, as if answering the aircraft instead of the man. "Jet's green," she said. "Recommend aircrew run a short alignment check before taxi." "Bias was close." "Noted," Monroe replied. "A hair too late, a shade too thin." She turned away, coil in hand, cable neat. Lewis let his eyes follow the path of her steps, cataloging everything he couldn't yet reconcile. It bothered him in a way he didn't mind being bothered. It meant his respect was waking up. The day ended with a sunset that burned the edges of everything clean and gold. Shadows of aircraft stretched long like arrows pointing at tomorrow. Crews drifted toward the gate in loose groups, laughter reforming in safe shapes now that the theater was over. Maya stayed until the light made the hangar a dim cathedral. She wiped her tools, logged out, and touched the edge of a photo inside her locker with 2 fingers before she closed the door, a habit that said, "I remember even if no one saw." Lewis, halfway to the exit, doubled back. He didn't know why. He found himself stopping 3 steps from her, hands empty for once. "Ma'am," he said, and didn't correct himself. She glanced at him. "Get some rest, Airman." "Yes, ma'am," he said. He hesitated, then added, You ever need a second set of hands, I'm around." Her eyes held his for a beat. There was something there, not softness, not hardness. Recognition. "Appreciated," she said. He walked away lighter. Behind him, Captain Monroe stood in the shadow of the ladder, unseen for a moment. He watched Maya close the locker. He watched the way she squared her shoulders before she turned, ready for the next day before this one was done. Some part of him, the part that belonged to the uniform more than the man, felt a flicker of respect like a pilot light catching. He covered it, out of habit, with a smirk he didn't entirely believe. Outside, the flag cracked once in a stiff wind, then settled. The base exhaled. Somewhere, a jet spooled down from a high whine to a comforting hush. The night shift took the field. And the question hummed there in the dark, where only the honest could hear it. If they laughed at you for the scar that kept them safe, what would you do? Speak or stand? Walk away or let your silence be the measure of their noise? Days passed, but the air around Hangar 12 began to change, the kind of quiet shift that only happens when curiosity replaces mockery. Lewis was the first to notice it. He'd stayed late that evening, cleaning out a ground power unit near Maya's bench. The hangar was half lit, the kind of light that turned steel blue and made silence heavy. Maya's tool bag sat open beside her boots, the worn canvas edges marked by oil and time. As she reached for a wrench, the flap lifted just enough for a patch to catch the light. An eagle, claws gripping 2 lightning bolts, stitched in silver thread. It wasn't standard Air Force issue. Not even close. Lewis blinked, leaned slightly, pretending to look for his own tool, but his eyes stayed fixed on that insignia. He'd never seen it before. It wasn't squadron, wasn't maintenance. The shape looked old, older than the units most people talked about. When she zipped the flap, the light vanished, taking the symbol with it. That night, in his small dorm room, he couldn't let it go. He searched the design on his phone, tracing the same words over and over. Finally, a match. 160th Special Operations Aviation Support, Night Stalkers. Lewis sat back slowly, screen glow painting his face pale. He whispered, "No way." The next morning, Maya was up before sunrise again. She stood near the edge of the tarmac, coffee in hand, wind tugging faintly at her flightline jacket. Her reflection moved faintly in the polished side of an aircraft, half shadow, half soldier. When the crew started their morning checks, she was already beneath the nose of a fighter, arms deep inside a comms array that had failed the night before. Lewis watched from across the bay. She worked quietly, sleeves rolled up to her elbows for flexibility. The light hit her forearm, and that's when he saw it. A tattoo, faded but precise. Wings spread wide, coordinates etched beneath them in fine black ink. He didn't catch the numbers, but he recognized the format instantly. Military coordinates. Latitude and longitude. The kind used for crash sites or mission markers. Before he could speak, one of the pilots walking by chuckled softly. Looks like something from a rescue squadron. The others grinned. Maybe she thinks she's one of them, another added. Maya heard it. He could tell by the small pause in her movement, one fraction of a second, but she didn't turn. She just tightened the final coupling, sealed the panel, and said quietly, "Systems green, you're clear." Her tone was steady. Too steady. Lewis watched the pilot's smirk fade. The kind of fade that happens when a man realizes he might have been talking to someone who's done things he can't imagine. Later that day, while the others filed out for lunch, Lewis stayed back under the pretense of logging parts. He couldn't help but glance toward Maya's locker. It was always shut, always locked, always neat. But as she gathered her things earlier, the reflection from the glass behind her bench caught something inside. A small square photo tucked near the mirror. He hadn't meant to see it, but it burned into his mind anyway. A downed aircraft, nose buried in sand, smoke rising into the horizon. And near the wreckage, 5 figures. 4 standing. 1 kneeling beside the tail, hand resting on a burnt fuselage. The silhouettes were stark against the sun. He couldn't make out faces, but he knew one of them. The smallest frame, center right, had the same stance as Maya when she inspected an engine, shoulders squared, left leg slightly off angle. Someone had written faint words in the corner of the photo, Coast 2015. Lewis swallowed hard. Before he could turn away, one of the mechanics, Jenkins, the loudest one, walked by, saw the reflection, and snorted. "Nice wallpaper," he said. "Guess even civilians need something dramatic to look at." Maya froze mid-step. Not long. Just a pause, like her body remembering something before her mind told it not to. Then she said softly, "Some things aren't for decoration." The hangar went still. Jenkins gave a small laugh, uncomfortable, and left. That evening, the storm clouds rolled in from the sea, dark and heavy. The air smelled of rain and jet fuel, 2 scents that always belong together. Lewis stood under the overhang, watching her work in the dim light. The others had gone home. She was calibrating sensors alone, sleeves up again, scar catching the glint of the fluorescent lamp above. He wanted to ask her, wanted to know the truth. But something about her silence stopped him. She looked like someone carrying invisible weight, not guilt, not shame, but memory. She finished the calibration, closed the panel, and leaned briefly against the aircraft's nose, eyes closed. For that moment, she wasn't a contractor, or a tech, or the woman people whispered about. She was just still. When she turned, she caught Lewis's gaze. He expected anger. Instead, she gave him a small nod, the kind that said, "I see you, and that's enough." He nodded back. The next morning, base operations buzzed with noise. Someone had found the photo, not inside her locker, but a printed duplicate she'd left near her bench. It had slipped loose overnight. It passed through hands fast, pilots, techs, anyone who wanted a look. "You think that's her? Same build." "Nah, that's just some old picture she found online." "Look at the scar, same side of the face." By noon, the gossip spread faster than jet fuel vapor. Monroe caught wind of it too. He passed her in the hallway, a smirk tugging the corner of his mouth. "Hell of a fantasy life, Ro," he said quietly. "You might want to be careful. Pretending to be one of them doesn't end well." Maya stopped walking. Turned slightly, enough for him to see her eyes. "I don't pretend," she said simply. For a second, something unreadable flickered behind his expression. Discomfort maybe, or realization. Then it was gone. That night, Lewis sat in the common room, the rain still drumming on the roof. He scrolled through images again, searched every emblem, every mark. He found the coordinates from her tattoo on an old operations map. His stomach tightened when he saw where they led, a remote patch of Afghan desert near the Coast Guardez Pass, crash site HH-60 Pave Hawk, loss of crew. He exhaled slowly. She hadn't been lying. She hadn't been pretending. The scar wasn't an accident. It was a story no one had earned the right to hear yet. He closed his phone, leaned back, and said softly to himself, "She's one of them." Some scars don't tell you what was lost, they tell you what was survived. As the camera of narration drifts back to the dim hangar, Maya is seen locking her toolbox, that faint patch still visible for a moment before the flap folds shut again. The eagle and lightning bolts hidden once more beneath layers of canvas and silence. The order came down on a humid Thursday morning, the kind that smelled of salt and kerosene. Anderson Air Base was set for a live emergency simulation, an operational readiness drill, standard procedure. But this time, Wing Commander Aaron Doyle wanted it to feel real. Full scenario, he told the officers in briefing. Fuel leak. Avionics failure. Fire containment. I want to see how fast your teams adapt when training meets chaos. Captain Blake Monroe nodded confidently. We'll run it like the real thing, sir. Good, Doyle replied. You're led. Pick your crew. A pause. Then, include the civilian tech. Row. Monroe's jaw flexed. Yes, sir. By 1300 hours, the hangar looked like a movie set without cameras. Emergency carts lined up, fire crew on standby, medics in position but relaxed. A few techs joked about taking bets on who would trip the first alarm. Even Lewis felt the tension hum under the casual chatter. Maya arrived exactly on time, tool belt already clipped, expression unreadable. Row, Monroe called, pretending to sound detached. You're on power systems, sim only. We're not trying to start a war today. Yes, sir. To everyone else, it was just a drill. To her, drills had never been just anything. At first, everything went according to script. Ground crews moved through the motions, hydraulic lines hissed softly, checklists rattled between fingers. Then, the simulation's trigger, a warning klaxon. Hydraulic pressure anomaly, port gear assembly, a voice read from the script. Monroe raised a hand. All right, people, show me how fast you can think. But before anyone could move, another alarm screamed, this one real. Red lights pulsed, too loud, too sharp. A sharp pop. Cracked beneath the fighter's belly, followed by a ribbon of gray smoke curling up through the landing struts. Someone shouted, wait, that's not part of. Then a second pop. Sparks. The acrid scent of burning hydraulic fluid hit the air like acid. Kill the drill. This isn't simulated, yelled a sergeant. Confusion fractured the hangar. Half the team froze, the other half scattered instinctively. Monroe stepped forward, hand up, hold position, but his own voice wavered. He didn't know whether to send fire crews or techs. The checklist didn't cover real fire. In the midst of it all, Maya dropped her clipboard and sprinted toward the smoke. Row, stop, Monroe barked. She didn't. Her voice cut through the sirens, controlled, trained, kill the master circuit, now. Someone hesitated. Do IT, she shouted again, sharper this time. The hangar lights flickered as power to the aircraft died. The hiss of burning hydraulic lines eased a fraction. Maya dropped to one knee, sliding under the jet's frame like she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times before. Her movements were pure muscle memory. Open, check, isolate, cool. She signaled with her left hand through the smoke, 2 fingers up, then a fist. Lewis recognized it as hand sign language used in confined maintenance, but faster, cleaner, almost tactical. Monroe stood paralyzed at first, watching her disappear beneath the fuselage. What's she doing? Someone whispered. Whatever it is, she's not guessing, Lewis muttered, already moving to assist. The fire crew rolled closer, but she waved them off with a sharp motion. Not yet. You'll blow the vapors, she called, coughing through the haze. A dull thunk sounded as she pulled an emergency cutoff valve by hand, a move no one attempted without full safety gear. For a brief instant, the smoke parted under a vent fan, and they saw her clearly, kneeling beneath the belly of the fighter, gloves off now, one bare hand gripping a glowing metal latch. The scar along her jaw caught the emergency light like silver lightning. Her right hand trembled, not from fear, Lewis saw, but from something deeper, older. The same way old wounds shake when adrenaline hits the body before the mind catches up. He shouted over the noise, Row, what do you need? She didn't even glance up. Rags. COSA hose? And someone killed that damn alarm. He scrambled, handed her the hose. She vented the line with perfect control, cooling the assembly until the last hiss faded into steam. Only then did she crawl out from under the aircraft, streaked in soot, breathing hard. Pressure stabilized, she said, voice hoarse. Seals cooked, but the tank's safe. The base fire officer arrived seconds later. Everyone clear? Maya turned toward the jet's tail. Not everyone! Before anyone could stop her, she ducked back into the smoke, where a young technician, Private Nguyen, lay trapped between a cable reel and the hydraulic cart that had toppled when the alarm went off. Monroe moved half a step. Row! She ignored him. With one arm, she shoved the reel off Nguyen's leg, then grabbed the kid's vest strap, hauling him backward in short, brutal pulls until his boot cleared the wreckage. Lewis ran to help, but she'd already lifted him halfway upright, checking his breathing with a quick tap to the chest. You're okay, Airman. You're okay. When they stumbled out of the smoke, the hangar erupted, half in shock, half in awe. Monroe rushed forward, face pale. My God, how did you? She cut him off gently, wiping soot from her cheek. I've done it before. The words landed like an echo from somewhere far away, a battlefield, a memory none of them shared. Medics took Nguyen, fussing over minor burns and a sprained ankle. The rest of the crew hovered nearby, uncertain whether to speak or salute. Monroe stood frozen, every ounce of arrogance burned out of him by what he'd just seen. His voice was thin when he finally said, You ran in before you decided it was real, she finished quietly. For once, he didn't argue. The hangar smelled of burnt oil and adrenaline. The alarms were off, but the silence afterward felt louder. Wing Commander Doyle arrived minutes later, flanked by 2 officers. What happened here? He asked, eyes scanning the smoke-blackened floor. Monroe straightened, trying to compose himself. Simulation turned real, sir. Hydraulic line ruptured. We contained it. Civilian tech led response. Doyle's gaze drifted to Maya, calm, streaked with ash, uniform smeared with hydraulic fluid. He studied her for a long moment. Led the response? He repeated softly. Yes, sir, Monroe said, lowering his head. Before anyone else moved, Doyle stepped closer to Maya. You okay? I'm fine, sir. You burned your hand. She flexed her fingers slightly, the skin red but steady. I've had worse. His brow furrowed. There was something familiar about the cadence in her voice, the way she said, sir, the posture, the stillness after crisis. He didn't push. Not yet. By dusk, cleanup crews swept the hangar, the scent of extinguishers lingering. Maya sat on the tool bench, hand wrapped lightly in gauze. Lewis lingered nearby, unable to shake the image of her crawling into that smoke without hesitation. You knew exactly what to do, he said finally. Her eyes stayed on the floor. It's muscle memory. Muscle memory from where? He asked quietly. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a water bottle, and took a slow sip. When she set it down, the flap of her bag shifted again, that eagle and lightning patch just visible in the dim light. Lewis didn't ask again. He didn't need to. Outside, a light rain began to fall, the kind that turned smoke into fog. Crew members passed Maya in silence now. No more jokes. No more whispers. Just the quiet weight of respect that doesn't need permission to exist. In the corner, Monroe stood with arms folded, watching her. He looked like a man replaying every word he'd ever said and hating how it sounded now. Guess even civilians can follow instructions, he muttered bitterly to himself. When she walked past him toward the exit, he managed, Row. She turned slightly. You saved him, he said. You saved the hangar. She gave a faint shrug. That's what training's for. Who's training? He asked. She didn't smile. The kind you don't forget. Then she walked into the rain, each step quiet, deliberate, like a soldier walking away from smoke that used to mean war. Some people run from the fire. Others run toward it, not because they're fearless, but because they remember what it cost when no one did. The scene lingers on Maya standing at the edge of the runway, rain streaking her scar, the faint glow of the hangar lights behind her. In her reflection on the wet asphalt, the shape of her old patch, an eagle clutching lightning bolts, flickers once before the darkness swallows it. The whisper begins among the crew inside, small at first, then spreading like wind through tall grass. She's not just a civilian. The debrief room on the second floor was always cold, even on island days when the air outside stuck to skin like a second shirt. Fluorescent lights hummed. A projector washed a white rectangle onto the front wall. Folding chairs squeaked. Coffee steamed in paper cups, no one touched. Monroe stood at the head of the room with a yellow legal pad, trying to turn chaos into bullet points. His voice was steady in the way men's voices are steady when they're rearranging the furniture inside themselves. "Timeline," he said, writing. 1306, simulation initiated. 1309, first anomaly. 1310, actual hydraulic rupture. He paused, jaw tight. 1310 and 30 seconds, Mrs. Spember. Rowe issued command to kill Master Circuit. He wrote it down. The miss looked wrong on the page, like a name tag stuck over rank. Across the aisle, Maya sat 2 rows back, neither hiding nor volunteering. A strip of gauze crossed the heel of her right hand. The soot had been scrubbed from her face, but a gray shadow clung to the stitching of her collar. She watched the screen, not the people. Lewis was 2 seats to her left, spine straight, hands folded. He kept seeing her vanish under smoke. He kept hearing her say, "I've done it before." A low cough punctured the quiet. Someone switched off a loud vent and made the silence feel heavier. Monroe lifted his head. "Let's talk decision points. Why did the drill escalate? Why didn't we?" The door opened. Wing Commander Aaron Doyle stepped in without hurry, like weather arriving. Conversation died mid-breath. Chairs realigned themselves as if by instinct. He removed his cover, tucked it under his arm, and took 3 steps inside. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room had already shifted around his presence. His gaze moved slowly across Monroe, across the front row of pilots, across the back row of mechanics. Then it stopped on Maya. He didn't blink for a count of 5. He looked at the gauze, at the way she held her shoulders square but relaxed, at the stillness. Then his eyes traced the old line along her jaw, the lightning-shaped thread of a scar you only see when the light is cruel or true. When he spoke, it wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. "Sergeant Rowe?" The room froze a beat behind the word, as if no one trusted their ears to deliver it clean. Monroe's pen stopped. It left a small dot on the page that spread like a spill. "Sir," he said, forcing a short laugh, "she's a contractor." Doyle didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Maya. His voice went softer, as if he were adjusting to a memory he hadn't planned to open. "Not always," he said. "I know that scar. A breath, almost a wince." "Kandahar," he continued quietly. 2015. Night air hot as a furnace. A pavehawk down hard in the dust. His hand lifted slightly, the smallest gesture of someone touching ghosts. "You pulled 2 airmen out of a burning HH-60. The sound in the room changed. Not a gasp all at once, but a wave, the intake of breath that moves from one side to the other when truth breaks the surface. A chair squealed backward. Someone whispered, "No way," and then shut his mouth like he'd broken something fragile. Maya stood, almost reluctantly, like a person who knows standing will start a storm she can't control. "That was a long time ago, sir," she said. The words were even. The eyes were not. In them sat a night sky no one else in the room had seen. Doyle blinked, just once. When he spoke again, his voice had grit in it. "You shouldn't even be walking," he said. "You were told you might not again. You saved lives that day, and then you disappeared before we could thank you." Silence. The real kind. It wasn't the hush of disinterest anymore. It was the absence of every mocking word, sucked out of the air so they could hear what they'd been saying to themselves. In the third row, a young mechanic stared at his own boots as if they'd said the worst of it. A pilot set his coffee down like it had become a weapon. Lewis kept still, jaw locked. a heat behind his eyes he didn't intend to show. Doyle finally looked away from Maya. He turned to Monroe, and the shift in his attention felt like a pressure change before a storm. "You just insulted," he said, quiet and precise, "a decorated combat engineer from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment." The abbreviation wasn't spoken, he didn't need it. The weight of the unit's name, the Night Stalkers, filled the empty places in the room where arrogance had been. Monroe couldn't meet Maya's eyes. Not because he was afraid of her, because he was ashamed for himself. His mouth opened and closed around words that would have been an apology if he knew how to say one in public. "Sir," he managed, weak. "I didn't." "No," Doyle said, "not cruel, just final. You didn't." He let the words sit. He turned back to Maya, and, for a second, the rank slipped, and the man stood there instead. The man who had seen casualty lists, and medals in boxes, and families on tarmacs under mourning flags. "What were the coordinates?" he asked softly. Maya's gaze fell for the first time to the scar on her hand, to the edge of the chair, to a place 5,000 miles away. She said the numbers. They were simple. They were not simple at all. Doyle nodded once, like a salute from a great distance. "I thought so." He looked at the room, at the very young and the not as young, at men accustomed to being the center of every story. "This is how this goes," he said, voice even. "Some of you will do 10 years and be told you were brave. Some of you will do 2 and be told you were heroes. Some of you will do what Sergeant Rowe did quietly, completely, and no one will know until the day we almost learn too late." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth had already done that part. He set his cover on the front table, as if unburdening himself of the symbol long enough to carry something heavier. "Sergeant," he said, using the word like a key returned to the right hands, "what did you see under that jet?" Maya took a breath that steadied the room. "Thermal bloom in the port line," she said. "Pressure spike. Vapors sitting under the bay. COS would have pushed the mix. We needed power dead, then bleed down, then cool. Nguyen was pinned under the reel. Basic physics. Basic triage. Basic." Lewis felt a short laugh catch in his chest and die there. Nothing about it had looked basic. Doyle's mouth curved, not a smile exactly. Something older. Respect, unadorned. "You moved before the plan found its shoes," he said. "Plans are slower than fires, sir," she answered. A rustle of clothing. The sound of men shifting in chairs because a sentence landed in the part of them that writes doctrine later. Monroe cleared his throat, a man trying to move a boulder with polite noise. "Sir, Ms. Rowe," he stammered, failing to decide what name fit. I misjudged." She turned her head. Not sharp, not forgiving. Just a motion that said, "I heard you." "We all did," he added, barely above a whisper. Doyle let him stand in that for a long second. Then the commander's gaze swept the room again, weighing it. He picked up his cover, set it against his thigh. "What you all think you know about rank," he said, "is that it's worn." He looked back at Maya. "Sometimes it's carried." He moved to the center aisle. The carpet made no sound under his boots. "On your feet," he said quietly. It wasn't a bark. It didn't have to be. The room stood as one organism, chairs scraping back in an awkward chorus that couldn't stain the purity of the moment. Doyle faced Maya, present arms. Hands moved to brows. Shoulders squared. The room pilots, maintainers, officers, airmen held still. Maya did not salute back. She didn't need to. She stood there with the impossible dignity of someone who had been on fire and decided to be the water anyway. Her eyes shone, wet but contained. She nodded once, the nod of a soldier to a flag carried past. The seconds stretched. The silence didn't hurt. It healed. "Order arms," Doyle said at last, voice softer than the first word he'd spoken. Arms came down. No one sat. He turned to Monroe, not unkind now, just exact. "You will run another debrief. You will include the parts you left out last time, what you felt, not what you wrote. You will ask Sergeant Rowe for recommendations, and you will listen when she gives them. "Yes, sir," Monroe said. The words were right. The tone was human. Doyle looked at Maya again, and there was something like apology in the way his eyes softened. "You disappeared before we could thank you," he'd said earlier. Now he added, "We won't make that mistake twice." Maya inclined her head. "I'm just doing my job, sir." "And once," Doyle said, "you did everyone else's too." A ripple moved through the room, somewhere between shame and pride, a place only truth can make. Doyle stepped back toward the door, then stopped himself. He turned to the young faces, to the old mistake, to the emblem on the wall. "For the record," he said, "when you see someone quiet, ask yourself whether you're looking at silence or steel." Then he left the room as he'd entered it, without hurry, like weather completing its purpose. The door closed with a click that felt ceremonial. No one spoke for several beats. Someone exhaled, shaky. Another wiped his eyes without pretending it was sweat. Lewis kept his arms at his sides because he wanted to salute again and didn't know if it would be too much. Monroe cleared his throat. He looked at Maya. Really looked. "I'm sorry," he said. No rank. No performative smile. 2 words only, as clean as he could make them. She studied him for a moment that was longer than comfort and shorter than cruelty. "Learn from it," she answered. He nodded once. It felt like being allowed back into a tribe he didn't yet deserve. Chairs creaked as the first few sat. Papers rustled. The projector hummed. The world tried to pretend it was normal, but the air wasn't the same. It was thicker with meaning, thinner with pride. The mocking space in it had burned away. Lewis leaned toward Maya, voice low. "Sergeant," he said, the word tasting right, "if you need an extra set of hands on any shift, I'm there." Her mouth softened. "I know," she said. "Thank you, Airman." He smiled, small and fierce. Monroe turned a page on his pad, found his place, and then set the pen down entirely. He didn't need it for what came next. "Okay," he said to the room. "We're going to run that timeline again. But this time, we're going to talk about the moment right before the decision. What we thought. What we missed. What we will do next time." He looked at Maya. "Sir Maya, will you walk us through your sequence?" She nodded, and the weight in the room shifted from shame to purpose. Outside the window, the flag lifted in a wind that hadn't been there a minute before. Inside, the younger mechanics lowered their heads, not because they were defeated, but because they were learning. The debrief had ended hours ago, but no one really left. They drifted, half lost in thought, half waiting for something that hadn't yet happened. The hangar felt like a cathedral after service, still holding the echo of prayer. Wing Commander Doyle stood near the center line of the bay, hands behind his back. The open doors framed a strip of tarmac washed in late sunlight. Outside, the wind was picking up, fluttering the edge of the American flag that hung over the hangar entrance. Maya Rowe stood near the hydraulic cart that had nearly taken a man's life. She'd stayed behind to help secure the line, her sleeves rolled back, the gauze on her hand fresh but unbothered. Around her, airmen and officers lingered, not to watch her work, but because they didn't know how to walk away yet. The silence was heavy, almost reverent. Doyle broke it first. "On your feet," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of weight that makes motion automatic. Every person, from pilots to technicians, from sergeants to civilians, stood at once. Maya turned, confused for half a heartbeat. Doyle stepped forward. The light from the open bay doors spilled over his uniform, ribbons catching gold, silver, and red like pieces of history made visible. He faced her squarely. Present arms. The order landed like thunder wrapped in velvet. Across the hangar, 30 men and women raised their hands to their brows. The sound of synchronized salutes filled the air, sharp, clean, absolute, no music. No words. Just the hiss of wind through steel rafters and the crack of boots aligning to the concrete floor. Maya didn't move at first. Her eyes flicked from one face to another as if making sure this wasn't some cruel joke. Another test, another simulation. Then her gaze met Doyle's. He held the salute longer than regulation required. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her eyes glistened, not from pride, not even from shock, but from something deeper, recognition. That after all these years, someone still remembered. She didn't salute back. She simply nodded once, slow and deliberate, her throat tight, her composure unbroken. When Doyle finally lowered his hand, the others followed in perfect silence. He let his arm fall to his side and said quietly, "Some people wear their rank." He took one step closer, his voice deepened, anchored by truth. "Others carry it in scars." The words hit the hangar like scripture. The light shifted, sunlight breaking through a high window and landing directly on her face. For a heartbeat, it traced the scar along her jaw, illuminating it. What had once drawn laughter now gleamed like a metal forged in flame. Lewis swallowed hard, blinking back the sting behind his eyes. He'd seen enough movies about heroes, none of them ever looked this real. Monroe stood behind the crowd, the weight of every cruel remark heavy on his shoulders. His cap hung at his side, crushed slightly in his hand. When the formation broke, he stepped forward, slow, careful, like a man walking on ground he no longer owned. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Maya looked up. "I'm sorry." The hangar stayed still. The apology sounded small, but it filled the air like the first honest thing he'd ever said. Her voice, when it came, was calm, not distant, not cold. "No need, Captain. We all learn." The words carried grace sharper than any reprimand. Monroe nodded once and backed away, his face flushed but grateful. No one clapped. No one dared. Respect doesn't make noise. The crew dispersed slowly, conversations hushed, eyes lowered, not in shame now, but in reverence. The same men who once laughed now moved with care around her, each step mindful, each glance softened by awe. Lewis lingered again, unsure what to say. When she caught his gaze, he straightened instinctively, shoulders back, as though standing before an officer. She smiled faintly, the kind that made the air easier to breathe. "You did good today," she said. "Just followed your lead, ma'am?" She shook her head slightly. "No." "You listened. That's rarer." Doyle waited near the hangar door, hat in hand, eyes on the horizon. The setting sun cast long streaks of orange across the floor, a perfect gradient from shadow to light. When Maya approached, he turned. "I thought you were gone for good," he said softly. "I was," she replied. "Until I wasn't." He studied her face, the calm, the steadiness, the small burn on her palm. "You didn't have to come back." Maya looked past him, to the aircraft gleaming under the last light of day. "None of us ever really leave, sir. We just find new ways to serve." Doyle's jaw tightened. There was pride in it, but also regret. "I should have told you back then," he said. "What you did, it meant something. It still does." She gave a quiet nod. "It meant we got to come home. That's enough." He smiled faintly. "You were always like that. No speeches, no spotlight." Her eyes met his. "Spotlights blind people, sir. I'd rather they just see the work." He exhaled slowly, then extended his hand. "Well, Sergeant, the work spoke loud enough today." She hesitated, then took his hand. A firm, steady handshake between soldiers who've seen too much and said too little. "Thank you, sir," she said. "No," Doyle replied. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, the wind caught the edge of her sleeve, pulling it back just enough to reveal the faint ink beneath. The tattoo of wings and coordinates almost faded into her skin. Lewis, standing nearby, saw it again. This time, no one joked. They just watched her walk into the sunlight, her silhouette framed against the open hangar doors. The light caught the patch on her bag, the eagle clutching lightning bolts. It flared once in gold before she stepped fully into the glare, and then it vanished. Once they laughed at a scar they didn't understand. They thought it was a mark of failure, something to hide, something to mock. But scars are proof that pain met courage, and courage won. The camera of narration lingers as Maya crosses the runway alone. The sunset paints everything bronze, the plains, the asphalt, her shadow stretching long behind her like a flag unfurled. She never wanted applause. Never asked for recognition. She just wanted to fix what was broken, even if it was people. The last line settles as the sound fades. Distant turbines, the flap of a flag, and the faint echo of one command still hanging in the air. Present arms. Evening draped over Andersen Air Base like a flag folded at half-mast, quiet, reverent, beautiful in its stillness. The hum of turbines faded into the distance as the last jet of the day clawed through the orange sky, banking west toward the sea. Maya Rose sat alone near the runway fence, coffee cup warm between her palms. The air smelled of jet fuel and salt water, that strange mix of danger and peace only airmen ever learn to love. The silver hull of the jet caught the light just right, and for a brief second she saw her reflection on its surface, faint, ghost-like, but there. The reflection looked older, maybe wiser, maybe just tired, but it was whole. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. "Permission to sit, ma'am?" It was Lewis. His voice carried that awkward mix of respect and friendship that hadn't yet found its balance. Maya nodded toward the open space beside her. "It's your base too, airman." He sat carefully, like the moment might break if he made too much noise. In his hand was a small blue and silver patch, the kind that goes on a uniform shoulder. He held it out. "For your locker, ma'am," he said. "The one that keeps the photo." She looked down at it. An Air Force patch, clean, new, unscarred. A small smile touched her lips. "Keep it," she said softly. "You've earned it." Lewis frowned a little, confused. "Ma'am, I didn't." "You listened," she said, turning to meet his eyes. "That's what keeps people alive. Listening. You'll understand someday." The young airman nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in deeper than any training manual could reach. He tucked the patch back into his palm, holding it like something sacred. They sat in silence a while longer, two silhouettes against the fading sky. The runway lights flickered on, one by one, lining the path into the horizon. A transport jet thundered into view, engines low and steady, lifting into the clouds. The reflection of its undercarriage shimmered across Maya's eyes. She whispered, almost to herself, "Still beautiful." Lewis looked at her, puzzled. "The sky?" he asked. "The sound," she said. "Means someone else is getting home safe." He didn't reply. He just sat with her. No jokes, no noise, no pretense. For once, the silence felt right. In every base, there's someone who's walked through fire and never said a word about it. You pass them in corridors, share a table with them in the mess hall, never realizing they once carried a nation on their back. The narration fades into memory, a flashback montage, slow and cinematic. Desert wind howling through twisted metal. A downed helicopter burning under a black Afghan sky. Maya, younger, uniform torn, eyes raw with smoke, dragging a wounded airman across the sand, her hands bloodied but sure. Another soldier shouting over the roar of flames. "She's still in there!" Maya turning back anyway. The crash site glowing like a second sun. Her hand gripping a rescue harness, refusing to let go. Then silence. No medals, no ceremony. Just the hum of a medevac engine and a heartbeat that refused to stop. The image dissolves back to the present. The same woman, same steady eyes, now older, watching a peaceful sky instead of a burning one. Maya lifted her coffee for one last sip, the liquid gone cold. She smiled faintly, as if remembering someone who never made it home. She stood, brushed the dust from her pants, and looked toward the flagpole by the hangar. The flag swayed gently in the warm wind, edges glowing in the amber light of sunset. She set her cup down on the fence post, straightened her shoulders, and raised her hand in a slow, perfect salute. There was no one around to see it. No cameras, no music. Just the sound of waves and wind, and the distant cry of a jet slicing through clouds. But sometimes the sky is enough of an audience. Lewis stood as well, a few feet behind her. He didn't salute, not yet. He just watched. Watched how still she stood, how steady her hand was, how every second felt like a promise to someone long gone. When she finally lowered her hand, she didn't turn around. "You heading out, airman?" she asked, voice calm. "Yes, ma'am," he said, See you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she echoed, a hint of a smile in her tone. He hesitated, then added softly, "It was an honor." This time, she did turn. Her eyes were bright against the last light of day. "It always is," she said. Louis nodded once, then walked back toward the barracks, boots crunching over gravel until the sound faded completely. Maya stayed until the sky went dark. The floodlights came on across the tarmac, painting long shadows across the jets and tool carts. She bent down, picked up the empty coffee cup, and looked toward the hangar one last time. The same hangar where they'd once laughed at her scar. The same hangar that now carried her silence like a hymn. She smiled, faint but genuine. The kind of smile you only earn after you've survived enough to stop proving it. Then she whispered, "To no one and everyone, all in a day's work." She turned toward the flag again, the stars catching in her eyes, and walked into the light spilling from the base lamps. Some heroes fight battles we'll never see. Some heal, some rebuild, some simply show up every day, carrying everything they've endured, quietly, completely. The wind picks up across the mic, faintly fluttering fabric. Real heroes don't need to remind the world who they are. The pause stretches, long and honest, because the world never forgets. The camera pans from the empty cup on the post to the runway lights stretching into infinity, one glowing path under a darkening sky. A jet passes overhead, its engines leaving a soft, thunderous trail that fades into silence. Some scars fade. Others remind us why we're still here. Sergeant Maya Rowe's story isn't about pain, it's about purpose. About courage that doesn't need applause, and duty that doesn't end with discharge. She didn't return for medals. She returned because some missions never really finish. Pause, sound of wind across the runway, faint hum of engines in the distance. She stood when others froze. She healed what others ignored, and in doing so, reminded us all that true strength doesn't need to shout. If you were moved by this story, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories. These stories keep the courage alive. One voice, one salute, one memory at a time. Fade out. The soft roar of a jet taking off, fading into silence.